Welcome to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I'm your host, Susie St. Angelo, and thanks for being here. On today's episode called Demystifying Mental Health Stigma, I'm joined by my guest, Alexa Sorensen, a licensed therapist. She has a master's degree from Grand Valley State University in Michigan. She has her own business called Reflective Psychology Services. And on today's episode, I think you'll find it very interesting and informative. This podcast is for you if you know you want to change something. Maybe it's your health, your career, something else. You might be wondering if this is the right age or stage in your life to be doing this. Or you're one of those people caught in analysis paralysis. I see, I understand, and I used to be that way too. So, just a reminder, you can find this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Apple, and Amazon Podcasts. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get into today's episode and meet my guest, Alexa Sorensen. Hi, Alexa.
Hi there.
How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really excited to have you today and continue our conversation we had a while back when I was excited you were interested in being a guest on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I am honored to be here.
Yeah, I think it's really a really important conversation that we have now and we continue about mental health. And so I'm pleased that you're willing and able to spend some time with me today and to hopefully inform our viewers and listeners about mental health, that it's not unusual. It's not a bad thing. It's not taboo to talk about. And first of all, I'd like to just ask you, tell our listeners and viewers about yourself and your background.
Well, thank you so much. So my background is in social work. So I do have my master's in social work from Grand Valley State University, which is located in Michigan on the west side of the state. And so that's kind of my background. I have a bachelor's in human services, which is also very similar in line with social work, which is kind of how I found my way to the social work field. And so that's a bit of my background. I have a mix of both the clinical experience in social work, where that is meeting with clients one-on-one and helping to support them through their mental health journey, and also a mix of macro social work experiences from fundraising to neurofeedback, looking at the brain wavelengths and helping people to feel better, utilizing neurofeedback as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag all over the place of some background experience, but it all comes down to, mental health and how it impacts our lives in a daily way. So.
Mm-hmm. So what led you to go into this field? Was there a particular moment or moments or a calling that you had?
That's a really great question. A lot of people ask that. And usually there's like that pivotal moment for people who are like, oh yeah, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And so, the way that I found myself in this field was kind of more of a natural progression of things. I really loved being with people and helping to support people that were in need. And with my bachelor's that I had, rural human services, there wasn't much that I could do with just the bachelor's degree other than maybe helping people find resources, which is a wonderful avenue for support and things like that. But I wanted to really do one-on-one clinical work with individuals. And so to be able to do that, I found my way into getting my master's in social work, which opened up a lot of doors for being able to support people in what they need help with. So it was just more of a natural kind of progression in how I operate and how I connect with people. And so, yeah.
So do you have a niche or certain things that you probably find people come to you for?
So, with the practice that I have opened up about 2 years ago with reflective psych, long for or short for reflective psychological services, um, the niche right now is still varied to some extent, but I do find that joy and connection with those who are in the LGBTQ communities, as well as the poly and kink communities too, for support. So, working to support those individuals that may not have as many resources as others do. And so that tends to be a draw for people coming in for that kind of support.
So, what do you see most often? What are people dealing with these days? Is there a common theme or a couple of themes that you see?
Yes, there are definitely some common themes. The interesting part about human beings is that a lot of what I see day in and day out with working with clients, we're all experiencing very similar things. Yes, everybody's lives are different. We're all different people. But the unique part is that we all struggle with a lot of the same stuff. And I don't think people realize that. And I really didn't. I mean, I knew that people had some similarities and that mental health impacted people in certain ways. And I mean, that's how you end up at different diagnoses, such as depression and anxiety, which are the two big ones that I see coming up and through. But as I've dove into more of the clinical realm, it's very similar veins across the board with just little different nuances. Depression and anxiety being the two big ones that people struggle with. And it all comes down to, our interactions with other people and relationships and how to navigate those. So those are some big themes that come up and through each and every day when I work with people.
So, Alexa, do you think that, and this is kind of probably a loaded question, do you think the anxiety and depression comes from not learning at a young age how to deal with these factors, or do you think social media has heightened that depression and anxiety because people are watching what other people are doing, and there's a fear of missing out and all that? I mean, I don't know if that's a fair question or not, but.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. The interesting part about depression and anxiety is that it can come from various different places, but I think you're onto something there, that it is, I think, a piece of us not talking about mental health at younger ages and not learning about it. That's a big part of it because of the shame that comes around with that. It kind of stifles the understanding and the experience of what you're going through at younger ages, because you're scared, you don't know what it means, and we kind of just suppress that at younger ages, and it comes out later in life. I also see it coming from social media and how that influences us in ways that we are comparing ourselves, or that people put a lot of pressure on themselves to be like whoever they see, or however they're viewing life through the lens of social media. So I think it's a variation of that. Also, chemicals play a factor as well.
Now, do you find that you talk about people's childhoods in your clinical practice, that you go back to a point where they started feeling this way and understanding what they were going through at that time? Is that part of helping people navigate now, is to go back?
That's a really good question too. Thank you. Yes, it is. I do go back often with clients about how they experienced their childhood and growing up years and what that was, because that does influence how we behave, how we feel, how we act today. I don't always go back in time with people to look at those experiences, but that is a pretty significant commonality. I would say 75% of my clients, we go back into the historical realm, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about between depression and anxiety and relationships, stems from our attachment with others at younger ages. I don't know. Are you familiar with attachment theory?
I am. I'm familiar with the avoidance, the secure, the anxious, and I don't know if there was a. Is there another one, or is there a combination? There's combination.
There's a combination. Yep. There's the avoidant, the anxious, and the combo, and then just a neutral attachment. So, but it does impact a lot of people in our day to day. So, or in their day to day rather. But so we do tend to go back if I'm picking up on anxiety, that avoidant or anxious attachment style that can come up and through with relationships and can stem from anxiety. If I'm picking up on that with clients, we do tend to go back into history to see how they've attached with others. The thing that I have found with attachment theory is it doesn't always have to connect to our parents. And that's what they're discovering now too through some more research, is that attachment could be to a sibling. Attachment could have impacted us through younger relationships that might not have been healthy, whether those be romantic or friendships. So attachment isn't just based in childhood.
I'm glad you clarified that, because what I read was, and this was several years ago, that it was attached to your relationship with your parents, and I just thought it was really fascinating. And I would think, well, no, I don't. I want to say I would think. Can you change? Can you grow out of those attachment styles? Can you work towards being a different type of attachment as you heal?
Yes, you absolutely can change your attachment style. First and foremost is the education and understanding about it. And I think that goes back to the education and understanding about mental health in general, is breaking through that stigma and really diving into what do I feel? How do I feel? Where do I feel it in my body even? Putting words to the emotions that we all experience within our bodies. I mean, that's a big part of what makes us human and separates us from other creatures on this planet, is the fact that we can have emotions and emote them, feel them, let them out. And so by gaining more understanding about those different attachment styles and mental health in general, you absolutely can change and grow in that attachment, and therefore find more satisfaction, not only within yourself and your own self-esteem, but also within those connections around you and in your relationships around you, and reduce that significance of anxiety that you might experience.
And along with that may go setting healthy boundaries.
Boundaries are huge. The boundaries is something that absolutely comes up in conversations every day that I have with clients. Boundaries are big. Yep. Yep. And I would say the reason that boundaries are so significant is because it allows you to put in place something that helps with self-preservation in a respectful and kind way, for those around you and yourself, and can help you to understand your own self-worth a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I want to go back to and I find this attachment conversation really interesting, and it might be something we want to continue on a future episode just entirely. But I want to go back to depression and anxiety, because for so many years people were afraid to say they had depression, or they had anxiety, or they had panic attacks. And, I think people are much more open, and I'm glad, because as we talked about before we scheduled this conversation, I'd like to demystify. I'd like to have this conversation include this. Let's demystify mental health and be comfortable talking about it, because I think there's more people who have these issues but think they're afraid to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're spot on there. There's still definitely a stigma around mental health and wanting to express and talk about how we feel, especially if it is in a quote unquote negative light. I like that word, demystify. I think that definitely helps to soften the, I think, potential intensity or fear that can surround that stigma.
I sat on two wellness committees for two different organizations that I worked for. And the first one, we did not talk about mental health, but the second one was very open about it. And it was at the height of the pandemic. And it was amazing. There was, in this organization, there were the warehouse people and there were the office people, and they were two entirely different groups. But we would do these monthly lunch and learns about a mental health topic. We decided to be open about it. And I was shocked, and I'd sit in every one of them. I was shocked at how many people, one, came, and two, how many people were open to talking about it. And three, how many people said, this is what I do for my mental health. And so they were, my jaw dropped that these people, and a lot of them were the warehouse people who probably don't interact with as many people maybe on a day-to-day basis as the office staff do. And so it was just really good timing, really eye-opening, and I think a sign of the future, hopefully in organizations, that people feel comfortable talking about it when you might not want to, for fear you're going to have ramifications and upward mobility of your career, or you're going to be, blacklisted from future opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is coming up and through, or at least I'd like to hope that there's more conversations about it happening. And you're seeing a lot more support, I think, through a lot of organizations with education about mental health. You're seeing the DEI, or diversity, education, and inclusion groups coming up and through the workplaces, which helps to support that diversity. And I think mental health is right up in that wheelhouse of diversity. We call about, neurodivergency, or neurodiversity even, that you have those varying different experiences. But I think it's good to talk it through and to have those conversations. And I'm glad to hear that more companies might be doing it. But I know that it's still not where it is going to land. I'm hoping that it continues to get more prevalent in conversations.
So how would you demystify it? If you were put in charge, an organization, or just in general, from your perspective, how would you demystify mental health?
I think the biggest thing is to continue to talk about it. When we talk about things such as even heavy stuff like depression and anxiety, talking about it removes the power of the mental illness itself and takes away that fear of shame and allows you to bring the emotion up and out. And so I think education discussions like these that can be public for people to access, having teaching classes and things, I think talking about it is the biggest thing to start to demystify and wipe out that stigma.
So I have young grandchildren. They're in grade school. If I were to talk to them about mental health, and I think they did have challenges during the pandemic.
Sure.
I think
Absolutely.
there were, and I would guess that was probably the start of some mental health for a number of people.
It really was.
I would probably say, how are you feeling? What would I do? Like, what would I say? I'd probably ask them, how are they feeling? And to name a feeling. And if they say, I'm depressed, what would I say next to them?
What does depression mean to you? Or what does feeling depressed mean to you? Because although we do have similar experiences in the way in which we feel these pieces of anxiety and depression, it's still important to ask the person, what does that mean to them? What do they feel within themselves? How would they describe it? Because that still is a very personal and unique thing that person is experiencing. Oftentimes when you ask people, how do they feel? they don't usually tell you an emotion. Have you found that in what you do too?
In coaching and in breath work, yeah, I do. But people are getting a little bit better when they feel that they can trust me, and I'm sure that goes with you. It takes a while to build trust in any relationship, and especially with a therapist.
Yeah, it definitely takes some time to build that rapport up. And so, yeah, if I'm asking somebody, tell me what you feel, they don't, are having a hard time even sharing that feeling, is even helping them to label the feeling is a great first step. Because sometimes we have these feelings and emotions inside of us that we can't quite pinpoint or label, and they almost feel like they get trapped. So giving somebody the words to even describe what they're experiencing can be so helpful.
And it could bring on, I'm thinking it could bring on anxiety when they can't put a name or a word to it, that it probably makes them a little uncomfortable and anxious.
Yeah. Definitely see that coming up and through. And especially being a practitioner, you're asking somebody, how they're feeling. They want to give you an answer, right? And so even recognizing if they're struggling to give you that answer, to respond, it's okay to acknowledge, like, you don't have to have the words for it right now. And just to meet them right where they're at is the most important part. And I think that goes back down to the question of, if somebody says they're feeling depression, what's the next question you ask? That's why I ask, what does depression mean to you? Because it allows me to meet that person right where they are. And I think as a helping professional, that's one of the biggest key pieces, is not only educating and talking about what it means, what the mental health support means, but also just understanding that human, where they're at, is really, really key.
Years ago, someone told me on the subject of anxiety that anxiety is not a bad thing.
It's not. It's really not. And I can agree with that as well. Really, anxiety is a part of our human system, that allows our bodies to indicate when we're perceiving fear or threat, or there's danger around us. But as we have evolved as human beings and we have more resources and things, even though that system, the anxiety system or the fight or flight system in our bodies, may get triggered by a response or something that feels like fear, it may not necessarily be that fear, because of our past experiences may have told us that that was fearful or something to be afraid of. But as time changes or we grow and evolve, it may no longer be an actual something to be afraid of. And sometimes the body's wires get a little crossed and overreact to a stimuli of sorts, which then triggers that anxiety. And I use the word overreact in a very loose way. I'm not trying to minimize the feeling or experience of anxiety. It's okay to have a reaction to a stimulus, but yes, it is a good thing. Anxiety is a good thing to tell us, to give us indication as to there's something around us that might need attention. And that's really what emotions are, is they tell us, they try to indicate to our bodies that that something's off and we need to pay attention to that.
And anxiety can show up in a number of different ways in our body.
It sure can. It sure can, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, when I started doing breath work with people, people showed some anxiety, both of doing it if they hadn't done it before, or it would come up through our time together. And I always say you have total sovereignty. If you're not feeling it, or it's bringing up some emotions, you can feel through those emotions, and you can come back to a normal breath, just a natural breath. But it's really you. And I've found that people appreciate that calms them down, knowing that they have control over their emotions and their body. And I I've seen people have anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And I had them for about a year, my senior year in college, and I felt like I was having a heart attack. And it was just such a strong body sensation, you know? And then afterwards, I would just be wiped out. I mean, I would just be like it was a crash.
Yeah, well, your body's going through a marathon when you're experiencing that panic moment or that anxiety because it's an adrenaline release. There's cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and adrenaline gets released as well as many other chemicals. And so, yeah, you do have that. I can imagine you experience that drop, and that's a common feeling. I also have experienced some anxiety a couple of years ago now. I think it was about 3 years ago where it hit me really intensely. I was working at a big corporate job doing fundraising for senior citizens, and COVID hit. Things got really stressful. And after that, I realized, the corporate world was not where I wanted to be and left that job. But I share that in that I took some time off just to kind of navigate everything that we had gone through with COVID and just to sit with myself to see what do I want to do next in my career. Um, and in that stillness, because I had never been still before in my life, because it was always about going to school and getting your degree and going to work and doing all the things. Yeah, I finally had a moment to be still. And that's when the anxiety surfaced. I was having multiple panic attacks a day. Didn't know why. It had just been probably suppressed for years. Anxiety that I never dealt with, didn't know. Lots of things can happen and create that. But um, in that, I was able to kind of navigate that for myself and try to figure it out. And sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you don't even know what's happening. And even as a practitioner who knows so much about anxiety and how it feels and what it looks like, it was hard to even recognize it myself. And I had to have a friend who was like, that's a panic attack. And I was like, oh, that's what that is. And then it just clicked, and then went and got some support for that and some help and worked through. And panic attacks are gone. Anxiety is practically non-existent after a couple of years of working through it. And but in that stillness, it can creep up, and I know that can be a scary space for a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you being open about that. And also, I would think that that would be I don't know how to say this. I'm not going to say a positive thing, but I think it helps you with talking to your patients who have that. They can relate. You can relate to them.
100% agree. I am actually really grateful that I did go through that experience. Although I kind of had experienced stress and anxiety before, not to that extent, but being able to really go through it to that extent absolutely has allowed me to bring that much more empathy and understanding into what I do, and being able to support people. And I know how terrifying that anxiety can feel. And anxiety can also contribute to depression and make you feel low and make you feel like you can't get out of bed. And it does get better. And that experience allowed me to really see that firsthand for what people that I work with daily go through.
So it may be obvious, but can you share some of the signs of depression and anxiety, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, maybe a holistic overview of it?
Sure, sure. With anxiety, it definitely is both mental and physical that you feel. It's like stress on steroids. It really is stress amplified. It can come in a sense in a form of worry and fear, and can really kind of, I call it almost like an anxiety paralysis, where you almost like freeze up. We talk a lot about that fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That is often what comes up and through when you're experiencing anxiety, is one of those. Either you can be aggressive with anxiety or want to run away and avoid from anxiety. Sometimes we just freeze up and have that anxiety space take over. With depression, it's a lot of lack of motivation, low energy, low mood, sleeping a lot can come up and through. Even agitation and aggression, anger can be a part of both anxiety and depression. Um, and so, and depression is unique because it can come in various different forms too. Same thing with anxiety. The way that I don't know if I read this through, I don't know if it was a book or a TED talk I watched, but the way that I like to look at anxiety is linear in that we've got depression on one side, you've got anxiety on the other, and in the middle is the present moment. And so you've got this linear experience with depression and anxiety. If you think too much or worry too much about the past, you're going to experience depressive symptoms. If you think and worry and stress about the future a lot, you're going to experience those anxiety symptoms. If we're able to be in that present moment in the here and now most often, it helps us to create that sense of homeostasis, which, just brings on that sense of calm. Everything's in alignment. We feel better. We're in the present moment of here and now and able to focus and not worry about past or future. That can really help. And so, although we look at anxiety and depression sometimes in a diabolical sense in which they don't go together, they absolutely can go together, and it's on one plane. And that's, I think, too, how you can both experience depression and anxiety symptoms at the same time, too. So that's kind of the holistic approach that I like to look at, is that if we can bring our thoughts and our feelings, emotions back into the here and now with an understanding of what all of that is, it can help us to feel a lot better.
That is a great description, and I know I appreciate it, and I know our viewers and listeners will appreciate having that description, because I think sometimes we just get so caught up in do I have depression? Do I have anxiety? Do I have both? And you've just done a wonderful job of explaining the difference. And I'm curious. I wonder how many people don't realize that they have either one, the other, or both in the world. How many people are going around undiagnosed, and how many people don't want to be diagnosed for some reason?
That's a really great thought, too. I think there are probably a lot of people that may want to avoid the knowledge about what they're experiencing because it's scary, unknown, but you're going to feel it anyways, And as much as I don't love labels, labels are helpful too, in that labeling through the experience of emotions such as depression and anxiety experiences helps to validate what you're going through as a human. It helps to bring that awareness and I think breaking down that shame that it's okay, you're not alone. There are other people that experience these things, and it's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean that you're damaged or broken or wrong or any of that sort. But yeah, I think to answer your question, I think there are a lot that are probably under or undiagnosed for various reasons. But
so, Alexa, are people who come to you for your services, are they usually diagnosed or not?
It's a mixed bag. So sometimes I have people who come to me with former diagnoses and are just coming for the support for those things, or we may pick up on others as we connect together. Some people do come for an assessment to see, do I have depression? Do I have anxiety? Oftentimes it gets picked up through their primary care physician, and they're like, you should probably seek some therapeutic support. I don't get too many referrals from doctors, but that's usually like when people are coming to seek therapy. It's like my doctor told me I have anxiety and told me I need to come see a therapist. So, and that's usually all the knowledge that they have about their experience or that mental health piece.
And so let's talk about support. You've mentioned support several times during our conversation. What is support? What does support look like to someone who has depression and/or anxiety?
That's where I kind of go back to the person themselves and meeting them where they're at, because that support in itself can look very different from person to person. So, for example, some people really like to just talk about what they're feeling that day, that week, and you can see the release of the anxiety and or low depressive feelings, if that person is able to talk it up and through and allow it to come up and out of their body, is what I call it. Or some people just experience it or describe it as just going bleh, where they just vomit a bunch of words onto the other person in front of them. Totally okay. That is what I experience a lot. And for that alone can be so helpful for people, just to be able to talk about it without judgment, without shame from the other person, just to feel like they have a safe space to release. Um, so that's a good chunk of time of what support looks like. And I think part of that also hits well for people because of the empathetic support that I offer to them in listening. So offering that reflective listening experience for them, validating and affirming what they are going through is part of the human experience, or affirming that they went through trauma and acknowledging that, and that impacts how they're feeling now, and to let them know that it's not the end of the world and it's going to be okay. So a lot of the support comes through verbal communication of that nature. Support for others can also look like doing some journaling at home, or doing worksheets, or reading and understanding. So for some, and I find mostly men have a hard time understanding or even putting words to emotions, and that's probably a whole nother conversation for another day. But I'll even start with just books that talk about the science behind emotion and what the various emotions we have, and what they mean and how they feel. Even getting somebody to understand that can be supportive. So there's a lot of different tools that we utilize, or that I utilize, for support.
I would think that someone who has experienced this maybe would be better served with one-on-one services and support than being in a group setting. It depends on the person, maybe?
Yeah, I think that also depends on the person and the experience that they're having. Sometimes people who have experienced depression and or anxiety get a lot out of that group support because they're validated and affirmed that they're not alone. I find that particularly with those who've experienced some intense trauma, being with and or around others that have also experienced something similar can really help with the healing process. So I think it really varies, that one-on-one experience and group. For a lot of people, I find that both can be really impactful if you're doing both in tandem, both individual work and group work.
So there's a book out, a memoir that I read called Group.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
It's a really great memoir about someone who did not want to go to group therapy. She's also going in an individual, but it turned out to be a lifesaver, and these people became friends with her over time. But she was really reluctant to do it. And I think it's a great book to read, and I still have the book. It's one of those books that I kept because I just thought this is a really fascinating book I would read twice if given a choice. And something else that I thought about as you were mentioning in a group therapy was when our mom died. Our mom died, 27 years ago when she was just 65. And so, so young, but there's four of us, and two of us went to group therapy. One got a lot out of it. I personally didn't like it. And this was 27 years ago, so it might be different, but I mean, we get different, we need different things from group therapy, where I would have been much better off on the individual side, talking to a therapist about my grief and my sadness.
Well, and I think therapy and or group therapy is going to hit differently at different points. So, like, as you mentioned, this was a while back. For people who've experienced even therapy and it didn't go well when they were teenagers, are afraid to go back because it wasn't a good experience. But you're going to have a different lens. You're going to have a different outlook. It's going to hit differently at different points. And so, it just depends on who you are as a person, and where you feel that support, where you feel most seen. I think could be helpful. So I have heard people not liking group therapy, and I've had I've heard the opposite too. So
yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think people, if they don't have a good impression about therapy, they're more reluctant to try it again.
yeah, I have found it to be the case.
And it's not like it has to be a home run all the time. I mean, certainly you have to build that rapport with your therapist or the counselor who's leading those conversations. But yeah, I just find there's a number of people say, "Oh, I don't want to do therapy," or "I did and I hated it," or "I didn't like the person," and that just kind of taints them for anything in the future, which is sad.
It does. It does. I think, the way to look at that, if we don't like a doctor, we don't like our dentist, or we don't like this art teacher, we change it up. You find a second opinion. Same can be had with therapists. And I find that to be the most important piece for therapy, is that you feel comfortable working with your therapist. Because if you don't, you're not going to get very far. And a good, healthy therapist will not be offended if you say, this just doesn't feel like the right fit. Totally fine. The most significant part for me is that people feel comfortable. And whether that's with me or not, or somebody else, great. I want them to feel comfortable to get the help that they need.
So your services are telehealth, correct? You're virtual.
Virtual, and I serve all of Michigan.
So you're not able to assist other people in other states?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Okay, good to know. So, as we move forward in this conversation, I always ask guests, what is your SOS? What is that simple step or two that people can take right now to move their life forward, besides reaching out to you if they live in the state of Michigan and schedule an appointment? To our listeners and viewers, what can they do if, at this point in their life?
If you are just not feeling like yourself, you're not feeling well, you feel anxious or depressed, find somebody you trust and talk about it. Talk about it. I know it's scary. I know it's hard to admit that you might not be on your best or feeling on par, but listen to that internal knowing and speak about what you feel to someone you feel safe and comfortable with. If you don't feel safe, you don't have a safe support system, you can call. 988 is actually the new hotline for mental health support. If you feel depressed, anxious, it's not just for suicidal ideations and experiences there. You can call 988 if you're having a panic attack. If you don't have a safe support system to reach to, talking about it, opening up. That's the SOS, I think. That comes first and foremost. It's just starting to break through that fear of opening up about it.
It's a great SOS, and that is just perfect. So is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything we didn't get to talk about that you'd like to talk about?
I think we talked about a lot of great things today. There's so many different rabbit holes we certainly could dive down. But I think the biggest piece is just acknowledging that I know it's scary to reach out about our mental health, but it doesn't have to be. And it is worth pushing through that fear to reach for help in whatever form that looks like. But really, if you're experiencing some mental health, symptoms that are impacting your daily life, getting that professional support is going to be huge. It's worth the movement towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Well, Alexa, where can listeners and viewers find you?
I can be found through www.reflectivepsych, and that's psych.com. That's my website that our services are listed there, as well as on Psychology Today. I can be found there under Alexa Sorensen or Reflective Psych. And so those are probably the two best ways to reach me and to find more about our services and how to get some help.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest today on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I hope that we can continue this conversation on other topics. We've just scratched the surface of what I think are important conversations and leading to that demystifying mental health struggles and having normal conversations. And I'm just so grateful that you've decided to join me today. And I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much for having me here on your show, Susie. And I also wish you the best in your endeavors as you continue to help support people as well. It was an honor to be able to just talk a little bit about mental health. And you're right, we are just scratching the surface here, and there's definitely many ways that we can take this. But it was really an honor to be here with you today. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, friends, sadly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. Today's episode was a healthy conversation with my guest, Alexa Sorensen, a licensed therapist, about the differences between depression and anxiety, attachment styles, and various support systems available for anyone experiencing mental health issues. Quick reminder on how you can support this podcast: like, share, and subscribe, and send me a review or any question you might have. And your question may be featured on a future upcoming episode. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And if you'd like to be added to my email newsletter, send me your email address. I'm happy to include you. And reach out to me if you're interested in coaching and breathwork sessions. Until next time, take care and see you soon.